You're on 94.9. It is 4:15, and it's that time of day for Creation Ministries International. Yes, it's a Tuesday, 4:15, and today we have Dr. Taz Walker on the line. Good afternoon, Dr. Taz.
Good afternoon, Mick. It's good to talk to you again. We'll have to meet more often than this. It's really nice to catch up with you.
It's awesome having you online. Dr. Taz, now, I think most people probably know you by now, but just in case they don't, Dr. Taz obviously works with Creation Ministries International now, can answer all sorts of questions when it comes to, aliens and things like dinosaurs and creation and evolution. And Dr. Taz has a Bachelor of Science, Earth Science, Bachelor of Engineering, Honours, PhD, Mechanical Engineering. Super, super smart person. That's why we love talking to him, because he knows all about stuff, which is really cool. And Dr. Taz, today, there's a lot of people in my area that probably have a few questions similar to the ones that I have, because we had a couple of earthquakes over the last few days, and I thought maybe you'd be able to answer a couple of questions in regards to them, like Friday and Saturday. Friday, I think it was 4.8 on the Richter scale. I actually felt like the cupboard right next to me, it shook a little bit. Yeah, I know it wasn't much of an earthquake. I just got like a little shake. But because I'm in a unit block and it's solid concrete, I thought to myself, first thing I thought was, what on earth could make this place shake? It's probably 1,000 tons.
That's right.
Yeah, I thought, okay, maybe an earthquake. And, of course, then we find out a little bit later it was centred up around Muswellbrook, which is where all the big open-cut mines are. And numerous people that I've talked to at church and stuff over the weekend, they said, oh, yeah, I wonder if it had anything to do with maybe mine subsidence, or because there's coal mines underneath us, and then there's also giant open cut mines up there where they've taken like millions of sort of tons of dirt away, or coal. Can that sort of help cause an earthquake?
Well, it can. Probably not that large. You said 4.8. I'm looking at a report here where it says 4.5. So 4.5 gives a bit of a shake. You can feel it, but it doesn't do a great amount of damage. It didn't. I don't know of any places that have been wrecked and houses that have been wrecked. But I know in Queensland when they put in Wivenhoe Dam and the area got filled up with water, they were monitoring earthquakes in that area as well. But they were nowhere near as high as 4.5. So I don't know if it would be the mining. It could be, but I doubt if it would. There are earthquakes that occur in this region, even before the mines went in. There was a really big one in Newcastle. It's caused a lot of damage way, way, way back. And people used to think that there were no earthquakes in Australia, but with time, as there was more monitoring and that, people realise that indeed there are earthquakes which occur in Australia, and so they've changed the codes for how you build. How strong you have to build buildings and tall high-rise buildings and that sort of thing. But I mean, to be involved in an earthquake, I was involved in just a small one in Christchurch once, and I heard it sounded like a wardrobe falling down the stairs, and it was actually an earthquake at Christchurch. And when I went to the airport that day and different people were talking about it, did you feel the earthquake? I was sort of concerned about getting up in time at that time, and I had my alarm set, and I was hoping that I wouldn't sleep through it to catch the plane. And I said, Lord, please, don't let me sleep through the alarm. And at the time when the alarm was to go off, there was this earthquake, which I thought, that was pretty good. I don't know if it had to be so bad as that,
so
Lord.
It was your fault.
That was pretty good. That was all my fault, that's right.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I was thinking maybe somebody down here was trying to move a mountain, they were testing their faith out. But
did you hear anything? Did you hear anything when it went off, or just the shaking of your building?
I did watch the news, and on the Friday earthquake, which was the bigger one than the Saturday one, there was a bunch of buildings up in Newcastle up in like that area, sort of west of Newcastle, that did have like facades fall down, and one had a wall fall in and that sort of stuff. And there was people on the news saying that they heard it, but where I was, all I heard was my cupboard next to me, just the very lightest little sort of rattle, tattle, tattle, sort of as it just rattled in its hinges. So I really didn't hear much.
I think when they're very big, they're very unnerving, and we're not used to them here in Australia, but that was an interesting one. I wouldn't be surprised if it was similar to the Newcastle earthquake being so large, 4.8. That's quite large.
Well, it was epicentered in a very similar area.
Yeah, yeah. And the area, like, it's part of an area which was tipped up and folded, and so there's a lot, the rocks are sitting on end, and they're folded around. So there's a lot of I think, still settlement that's going down from the rocks. And of course, we point to what happened during Noah's flood, and there's a lot of evidence for huge amounts of earth movements during the flood, which occurred. And so, creation geologists will just say, talk about the earthquakes that we have today are really, are left over from that. Although, the Bible does talk about big earthquakes in the future, doesn't it, coming up?
Yeah. Well, now, we're on top of a giant coal basin, and like we're located fairly high above the coal. There's a lot of rock between us and the coal, but as it comes out towards the edges, whereas this was sort of epicentered near one of the edges of this, they call it the Sydney Coal Basin. This was sort of the northern edge of that giant basin. Coal, I assume, because it used to be plant matter, didn't it?
That's right. Coal was once plant matter, and so during Noah's flood, it was formed during Noah's flood. As the flood progressed, there's lots of water, lots of movement on the earth, and the vegetation that was alive on the continents before the flood was ripped up and washed around, and so there's a lot of vegetation floating, and then it would sort of not settle down, but it would be ground. It would ground on some sediments and stuff, and then other sediments would wash over the top of it, and eventually, it got buried. And some of the coal around the Sydney Basin, they say that was buried at 4 kilometres of sediment. So sediment's been washed off the area. So it's been quite settled in our area since the flood, but not if you live in New Zealand. There's a lot of movement and earthquakes in New Zealand, and volcanoes and those sorts of things, showing that it's a mobile planet. The Earth's crust is very mobile, and in certain places where the plates come together, you can experience a lot of trouble like that in New Zealand, in Japan, and it's going through the Southeast Asia, up in through Nepal. It's sort of, there's lots of earthquakes in there. So, but we don't have much in Australia. We haven't, over the years.
Yeah, well, I assume because, they're on tectonic plate or fault lines, they're, prone to more movement because we're on this giant plate shape sitting on top of coal. I'm assuming maybe that is like its own little fault line, or it's not a tectonic plate, but it's a big plate. It's literally a big plate sitting on top of coal.
Yeah, that's right. But often what happens is there are movements of the Earth which occurred in the geological past, and so you get faults. There's the one that goes through Sydney, through the Blue Mountains of Sydney, a very large fault that occurs through there. And often what happens is with the movements in the Earth's crust as the continents move, and that these faults are reactivated. And so you can get movements along these faults. And I'm not sure if there are any faults along in the area where the earthquake occurred, although people would know, people who look after these, shaking and measuring the shaking and the seismic effects and that sort of thing, they would be able to work out where it actually occurred and whether there are any significant faults through that region.
Yeah.
Past ones, yeah. So it sort of indicates, it's really quite unsettling, isn't it, that the Earth's not as solid as you believed it to be when you see those sorts of things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of fresh for everyone down here, particularly people north of us. A lot of people around here just felt it. Not a lot of people completely missed it as well. I was kind of lucky. I was in a very, very quiet room, solid room, and just seeing that door shake for me was like, wow, that's weird. I don't know what could do that.
Okay, so the door shake like it went open, or just wriggled in its it's in its door frame.
Yeah, it was one of those glass sliding doors to a cupboard, so it literally wriggled inside its frame. Yeah, so I did hear it.
And you wonder what's going on? What's going on? Yeah.
Yes, because you don't know what it is. But of course, then everyone's questioning. Well, how do we get them if there's no fault line here? But you're saying there are minor fault lines as opposed to the giant ones in New Zealand.
Well, there are fault lines in the past. Yeah, well, the ones in New Zealand, they're active. That's where two plates connect, rub together, and so there's movement along those faults. But in Australia, well, the idea is Australia is just one great big plate. So it goes from Western Australia to the west of Western Australia to the east of Eastern Australia. So there's this great big plate, and it's supposed to be a really stiff and rigid plate, and you're not supposed to get any earthquakes in a plate. It's only supposed to happen at the edges. But in Australia, these earthquakes do occur. There's quite a number over the years that have occurred in West Australia, in Central Australia, and so that's a little bit of an anomaly from the theory about how it happens. And I think also it indicates that the sort of the continent is still reasonably young. We're talking about 4,500 years since the flood ended, and that's when the major drama ended. And so the fact that these plates are not totally rigid is a very interesting situation.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, look, we're on borrowed time for our little song break, so I might just put Apollo Ltd on with Redemption Song, and we'll come back to Dr. Taz Walker very shortly. If you have any questions for him, please send them through to our text line. Just SMS 0401 949 949. That's a text message 0401 949 949. You're on 94.9. It is 23 minutes to 5. And, of course, we have Dr. Taz Walker on the line from Creation Ministries International. He's been giving us a bit of a rundown on, well, I guess the land that we live on here and, what's been going on over the last few days. Of course, we've had earthquakes and a few rumbles underneath us, and it's sort of nice to know what's down there and why it's doing it. And, of course, from what Dr. Taz was telling us, it all started with a big flood that pushed all the plants and stuff down underneath us. And that was why we're on this weird sort of bowl. Now, Dr. Taz, you go out and do talks all the time in all sorts of different places. And have you done any recently?
Yeah, I was at a school just recently, and that was really good. And they asked me to talk about the holes in evolution theory, because the young people, they're really sharp. The young people are sharp and keen to find out, and they ask critical questions and that sort of thing. So I was just trying to touch on some of the holes. And of course, there's dozens and dozens of holes, and I couldn't go through with them all. And so I had to sort of give them a bit of a guide on how how it works about the evolution theory. Mm-hmm. So that was really interesting to do that. They listened carefully. I just made the point that evolution is actually, they say evolution's science, but I made the point, no, it's not science, it's a belief system. And so it tries to explain everything without God, that it all happened by natural processes. So that's the belief. And so they believe that even before they look at the evidence. And that's the idea of it. And so, of course, it doesn't matter what holes there are, because they're already committed to explaining it. And so if there's a hole, they just say, oh, well, we haven't worked that out yet. So one of the holes is, they didn't expect to find soft tissue in dinosaur bones. Yeah. They thought dinosaur bones were millions of years old, and some lady found this soft tissue in them. And so they didn't say, oh, okay, so the world is young, it must have been created. They've already believed and already committed to the idea that it all evolved. And so they say, oh, this is amazing, really interesting. It's hard to believe, but I wonder how it happens. So the idea is when there's a hole or a problem, it doesn't stop them from believing it. And so one of the really big issues is if you're trying to explain everything without God, well, where did life come from? If there was just unalive chemicals and things, which are just natural chemicals like dirt and stuff, how did the first living cells come about? And nobody knows how that happened. They've been sort of trying to figure it out for years, to 100 years or more. And basically, nobody sort of stops believing it because they say, well, it must have happened somehow because we're here. And so I just make the point that it doesn't stop people believing it. They give you the impression that it's based on science, but it's actually a belief system. And there's lots and lots of things like that, which I find is quite amazing. And when I talk to their students about it, they find it's quite amazing too, because you're given a different impression. You know, they give you the impression that we're just basing this on evidence, and, you know, we just go where the evidence leads. Not like you people are Christians and you have faith, you just believe in faith. We look to evidence, and in actual fact, it's not like that at all. That's a little bit of a tricky way of presenting it, you know. So I find that's very interesting.
I found it was amazing when Stephen Hawking, somebody said to him, so how did everything sort of come about? You know, all the planets and everything else. And his answer was something along the lines of, well, first there was nothing, and then there was something. And I thought, okay, that really doesn't answer anything. He just went from, just went bang, there it was, from literally nothing at all, I think his words were. And I thought that really didn't explain a thing to anybody.
I'm amazed that people can say that and just keep a straight face. You know what I mean? And I know Richard Dawkins. I mean, he's sort of a lot of people don't know about him now because he's gone out of the news in the last 5 years or more. But he's very much a believer in evolution, and he believes that there was nothing and that it exploded. And he says, actually, nothing is actually very complicated. It's not simple. I remember he said that in a Q&A in Australia once, and he held his hands up and he's just explaining what nothing was, and the audience laughed. Because it's so ridiculous. Yep. And he says, "What are you laughing at?" He said, "Have you stacked this audience against me?" You know, and so it's very,
makes
very
no sense, does it?
It makes no sense. And there was a guy who wrote a book. I can't think of his name now, but he wrote a book called "A Universe from Nothing," and so that's the way it goes. And so, even though there is no explanation, basically our academic institutions are committed to this secular philosophy that there is no God or nothing supernatural behind it. And but when you point out amazing design in the world, and then you say that God created, they'll say, "Well, who created God? You know, where did he come from?"
Yep.
And so you have to say, well, hang on, you know, you're thinking about a God that's created. That's not God. The Bible talks about a God that's uncreated, that he's eternal and he's always existed. Yep. So that's the difference. And he didn't come from nothing. It came from God. God created, which is amazing. And God is spirit. And the Bible says in one place that in the beginning was Word. So the Word, which is like information, and about specifications, and it was those that did the creating. And we know today that if you want to make something, you have to write down a specification and work out what it is you're going to make. You have to have the concept in your mind to be able to make it. And so that's what happened with the universe, and the Bible explains that as brilliant the way it does it.
Yeah, I remember when Dr. John first started speaking for Creation Ministries. This is years ago. And he told us way back then about some of the talks he'd done and some of the things they had talked about from old science manuals, like high school science manuals. And he was talking about some of the things that are no longer used because they've actually proven them wrong. And they were basically, when it came to evolution, they've actually proven certain evolutionally. And since then, there's been quite a few years since you guys started speaking on Rima. There's been so many news articles where so many different things have been proven wrong on the evolutionary tale. However, they're still on it.
That's right. And because it's a commitment. It's a commitment to naturalism, and you could say that's basically atheism. So it's two different religions. It's the religion of the God of the Bible who created, and it's the religion of atheism. And Richard Dawkins, the atheist, who's gone off the boil at the moment, but he wrote a book years ago where he said evolution, or Darwin, made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, because in his mind, Darwin or evolution, the survival of the fittest, explains it all. Mm-hmm. But it's very interesting. Some of these things are disproven. There's there's a German evolutionist called Ernest Haeckel, who did a lot of he wrote a lot of drawings about embryos. And he argued by his drawings that the embryos of all these different animals, like fish and birds and people and pigs, they all look the same at a certain... And he said, that proves that everything just evolved from a common ancestor. Well, that was disproven. That was abandoned back in the early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, and basically it was abandoned. But they're still teaching it at high school in the last 10 years. And there was a question on the exam paper about Haeckel's embryos. And so we say that these arguments are so convincing that they can't let them go. It's sort of, they are so powerful in convincing people that evolution's true that they just keep using them over and over again, even though they've been disproved. It's very, very amazing what's going on.
Yeah. Well, I can only assume nowadays that they've got microscopes that can see so much further than they could even 30, 40 years ago. They can see the tiniest little things, and of course I'm sure they can see the differences in there now. Yeah,
that's right. And as electron microscopes, which have been around for decades now, but they've been amazing as well. And to be able to see things that are so small.
Yeah, like those little machines that, it was one of you creation guys sort of sent us videos on the little machines that are inside the cells in our body. That was just mind-blowing seeing that sort of stuff. But, when you realise that those things do what they do, you think they just can't come about by chance.
That's right.
There's too much in there.
Yeah, that's right. And at Darwin's time, when Charles Darwin wrote his book, under the microscope, it just looked like a blob. And they didn't really see what was inside the cell. They could just see a blob that was the cell. Yep. But since, with what you were saying about the doing the extra magnification, they actually can see these machines. They can identify these machines. There's amazing machines that do all sorts of things in a living cell. It's factories and energy generation systems and garbage disposal systems, and highways and postal system. It's all in a living cell, and it's all just assembled, and it all has to be there to work. And if something that's not working, the cell dies, and so it has to come together all together at once. It can't do it in little bits, and it indicates that it happened quickly. And also that there's an amazing, intelligent mind behind it all. And the other amazing thing that the Bible says is this intelligent mind is a mind that loves us and cares about his creation. Yeah. And a lot of people find that hard to believe, but it's quite amazing. And as people come to know him, what a difference it makes in their lives.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Taz, we've come to the end of another awesome week, and hey, love what you do with us. Yes, I know, it seems to go in a flash. Love what you're doing with us, and look forward to next time.
Yeah, that's great. Good on you, Mick. It's great. It's nice to talk to you again. God bless you.
Okay, well, thank you so much.